Have you ever seen someone die and then pour you coffee years later? That's what made war veteran Jonas MacBride freeze, mid-breath, mid-thought, as the waitress leaned in with steady hands and a scarred arm, because the tattoo inked just below her sleeve, AVE 09 times, wasn't just military code. It was the buried name of a black ops unit that never existed, at least not on paper. A unit he watched burn, a unit whose medic they all believed had died in the fire. But she didn't die. She survived. And now she poured coffee in silence, endured mockery from cowards, and carried something far heavier than any tray. The truth they tried to bury with her, what happened next shattered reputations, exposed a cover-up that went deeper than war, and proved one thing louder than words: some units may be erased, but their ghosts still know how to fight. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Veteranbiker for stories that fight back in silence. The bell above the door jingled as Jonas MacBride stepped into Rosie's diner, his boots heavy against the checkered tile floor. The scent of sizzling bacon and burnt coffee hit him like a wave, nostalgic, grounding, and oddly comforting. The place hadn't changed in decades. Vinyl booths, chrome stools, sunlight pouring in through slanted blinds. It was as if time refused to touch this tiny slice of rural California. He took his usual seat, third booth from the end by the window. He hadn't been here in over a year, maybe two. But today, something had pulled him back. Maybe it was the road, maybe it was the nightmares again, or maybe, Jonas admitted to himself, he was just tired of pretending the ghosts were all gone. He let out a slow breath and unzipped his leather jacket, revealing a faded patch sewn onto his denim vest beneath, a crimson viper curled around a combat blade. No one in the diner would know what it meant. No one ever did. Echo Viper 9 didn't exist. Not officially. Not anymore. He rubbed the burn scars on his forearm absently, the ones that still ached in the cold, the same forearm that once bore a matching mark, until it was eaten away in Kandahar. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Coffee, sir?" He looked up and froze. The waitress, young, maybe late 20s, stood with a notepad in one hand and a steaming coffee pot in the other. Her hair was tied back in a no-nonsense bun, and her olive-green shirt hugged wiry arms that hinted at strength beneath the surface. But it wasn't her voice or her posture that stopped Jonas mid-breath. It was her arm. She reached forward to pour the coffee, and as her sleeve shifted, the sun caught something inked along the inside of her right forearm. A tattoo, blocky, military-style lettering, bold, simple, but unmistakable. AVE 09 times. Jonas's eyes widened. His heart stuttered. He blinked. Once, twice. But the mark didn't disappear. He'd seen it before. Not in some manual, not on the internet, but in the dirt, in the blood, in the dark caves of Maruf province, when men screamed and fire consumed everything. "No," he whispered. The waitress, Marisol, her name tag said, paused. "You okay, sir?" Jonas didn't answer, because he wasn't okay. He was back there again. The clink of the coffee cup against the saucer snapped him partway back, but Jonas couldn't stop staring at her arm. "Sir?" Marisol's tone now held a hint of concern. Her eyes flicked from the untouched coffee to his face. "Do you need anything else?" His lips moved, but no sound came. He couldn't stop looking at that tattoo, AVE 09 times. Clean, crisp, not faded like the ones on the old dogs from war. This was fresh, as if she had it inked just a few years ago, or months, or maybe she earned it. Jonas's hands trembled. He forced them under the table, ashamed of the reaction. But his mind was spiraling. That code didn't belong in the world anymore. It was meant to die with the unit. With them. With her. She shouldn't be alive, he muttered. Marisol frowned. What was that? He looked up at her, finally meeting her gaze. Dark brown eyes, steady, calm, but searching now. "I knew that code," Jonas said, his voice suddenly hoarse, like dust in his throat. "Where did you get it?" Marisol's spine stiffened just slightly, barely noticeable to someone else, but Jonas saw it. Her fingers instinctively pulled the sleeve down, too late. "It's personal," she said quietly. "Old family thing." Jonas narrowed his eyes. "Family? No, that doesn't check out. That code, Echo Viper 9, was blacked out, scrubbed. Even we weren't supposed to remember it." Marisol's jaw tensed, but she didn't respond. "Answer me." His voice had a crack in it now, not from anger, from something deeper, fragile. "Where did you get that?" People were starting to notice. A woman in the corner booth glanced up from her pancakes. The man at the counter, ex-biker by the look of his patches, slowly leaned back, sensing tension. Marisol placed the coffee pot back on her tray. "I think maybe you've had a long day, sir." But Jonas stood now, rising slowly, every joint grinding like an old machine reactivated. "I carried one of your team out in my arms," he whispered, staring at her like he was trying to see beneath the surface. "I saw that same mark on a patch, soaked in his blood." Marisol didn't flinch, but her eyes betrayed the first flicker of recognition, and that was all he needed. For a second, no one breathed. Jonas's voice cracked again, but this time it wasn't from confrontation, it was from something broken deep inside. "I buried that insignia," he whispered. "I watched the caskets, all of them, go up in smoke, and I saluted each one. EV-09 times was sealed, purged, erased like we were ghosts that never existed." Marisol stood frozen. She could have walked away, could have shrugged it off like some tribute tattoo she didn't understand, but she didn't. Instead, she slowly stepped forward and said quietly, "Who was the one you carried?" Jonas's jaw clenched. He looked at her not as a stranger now, but as someone halfway between memory and miracle. Corporal Avery. He was just 19. Marisol blinked once, slowly. "He was my brother." The air in the diner collapsed. It was as if the very walls leaned in to hear what came next. Jonas stumbled back half a step, visibly shaken. "That's impossible." "Your family, they were listed as Kia," she finished for him. "That was the story. That's what Command wanted. They left us there." Jonas sat down slowly, as if his legs could no longer hold the weight. Marisol moved quickly, grabbing a glass of water from the service tray, kneeling beside him. "Breathe. I saw the fire. I saw it. We all thought there were no survivors. There weren't supposed to be," she said, voice low. But Echo Viper didn't die. Not all of us. Across the room, forks had stopped moving. The sizzle from the griddle faded into the background. "You're not on any lists," Jonas muttered, staring at her face like he was seeing someone rise from a grave. "They erased you." Marisol nodded. "And I let them." Jonas looked down at her arm again, at the crisp tattoo, EV-09 times, inked in stark black. "You wore the mark," he said slowly, "not as a memory, but as a warning." Marisol didn't deny it. Jonas finally breathed out, then leaned in close. "Why now? Why show it now?" She looked around the diner, then locked eyes with him and said, "Because someone's trying to bring Echo Viper back from the ashes, and this time they won't be leaving any of us behind." Jonas didn't sleep that night. He returned to the motel 2 blocks down from Rosie's diner, room 12, the one with the rattling fan and the wallpaper peeling at the edges, but the bed might as well have been made of stone. He lay there in the dark, boots still on, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling as though it might blink back. She's alive. They lied. They buried them, and she's walking around pouring coffee in a diner like the war never touched her. But it had touched her. He saw it now. Not just in the tattoo, but in the way her body moved, like she was always keeping count. Calculating distance, exit points, situational awareness built into her bones. That wasn't waitress training, that was survival, the kind you never unlearn. At 3:47 a.m., Jonas gave up on sleep and reached for the duffel bag tucked under the nightstand. From it he pulled out a folder, battered, with a hand-sketched Viper logo on the front, and laid it across the bed. Inside were records, clippings, names no longer in the system, whispers, rumors, fragments he'd gathered for nearly 5 years. Every time someone said that squad never existed, or we don't talk about Kandahar, he collected it. Like a man chasing ghosts, Echo Viper 9 wiped clean from every military database after 2014. Official cause: classified munitions accident during extraction. Unofficially: too dangerous to let survive. Too inconvenient to acknowledge. And now, Marisol Rivera. The name had never come up. No photographs, no aliases, not even a trace of medical evac. Just gone. Like smoke. And yet he'd spoken to her. He saw the same resolve in her eyes he saw in every man and woman who had crawled through hell and didn't come back whole. He saw Echo Viper. Jonas closed the folder and stood, stretching until his joints popped. Outside, the town was just beginning to wake. A milk truck rumbled past. A dog barked at something invisible. Morning sunlight pressed weakly through the blinds. He grabbed his jacket, checked the sidearm tucked in the inner pocket, habit, not paranoia, and stepped out into the crisp air. He needed to talk to her again, not just for himself, but because if she had survived, others might have too, and if others had survived, that meant the mission wasn't buried deep enough. Marisol Rivera had learned the art of invisibility long before she'd ever stepped into Rosie's diner. She woke before dawn as always, stretching in silence while the world outside still clung to shadows. Her apartment above the laundromat was small. 1 room, 1 window, no luxuries. But it was clean, efficient, and most importantly, overlooked both alley exits. She never stayed anywhere she couldn't map with her eyes closed. She moved through her morning with mechanical precision, boiled water for tea, 3 slow breaths, checked the deadbolt, then the second lock she'd added herself. A small steel box under the floorboards held her fallback ID in a clean thumb drive. She touched it every morning, just in case. Then she rolled up her right sleeve and stared at the ink. Eve 09 times. It was the only part of her former life she allowed to remain visible. The scars around it had faded, but the mark remained sharp, painfully so, as if it were etched into her bones, not her skin. Some days she resented it, other days it reminded her who she was before the fire, before the silence. Echo Viper had never been a perfect unit. They were fast, dirty, unsanctioned, but they were hers, and they'd been abandoned. She pulled down her sleeve and tied on her apron. At Rosie's, Marisol played her role well, kind but distant, polite without warmth. She wasn't unfriendly, but she never lingered long enough for anyone to ask questions. The regulars thought she was shy. Some assumed she had a kid at home. One even joked she was probably in witness protection. None of them were entirely wrong. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Rosie's wasn't just her workplace, it was her watchtower. At the end of each shift, when the other waitresses had gone home and the cook was locking up, Marisol would take 15 minutes alone to restock. What she actually did was check the footage, not from the diner's old security camera, but from the microcam she'd installed in the vent above booth 3. It was always booth 3. The one by the window, the one Jonas had chosen. Fate? Maybe. But she didn't believe in fate. She believed in patterns, surveillance, countermeasures, so when she watched the footage from the day before and saw Jonas MacBride's face go white at the sight of her tattoo, she didn't panic. She paused the frame, zoomed in on his expression, and whispered, "Finally." Victor Grange strolled into Rosie's diner at exactly 8:17 a.m., as he did every Thursday and Saturday. like clockwork. He wore his usual smugness, a crisp golf polo that hugged his gym-sculpted arms, and that ridiculous aviator grin that never quite reached his eyes. Two hangers-on trailed behind him, Donnie and Chase, both local boys with more opinions than spine. They took their booth, second from the back, and Victor made a show of stretching like he owned the place. "Morning, sunshine!" he called as Marisol passed with a tray. She didn't flinch, she never did, but Jonas, seated 3 booths away, did. He recognized Victor's tone from a mile off. The same condescension that had laced the voices of contractors in war zones who'd never fired a shot but still wore tactical vests. Men who mistook cruelty for charisma. Victor leaned back, watching Marisol's every move. "You know," he said louder, clearly aiming for the surrounding tables, "I read somewhere trauma survivors shouldn't work in customer service. Might trigger the poor things." Laughter from his booth. Marisol kept walking. Victor wasn't done. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone and started recording. "Oh, don't mind me," he said. "Just capturing excellence in motion. Maybe if she smiles it'll break the camera." More laughter. Jonas set down his fork. The eggs on his plate had gone cold. He glanced at Marisol, saw the quiet tension in her shoulders. The way she subtly shifted the tray weight to her left hand, not to avoid dropping it, but to free the right. That's muscle memory, he thought, not waitressing, combat reflex. Jonas stood slowly, not yet approaching, just watching. Victor pointed his phone toward Marisol again, trying to provoke another clip for his private collection of Waitress fails. He kept a channel, apparently. Jonas had heard about guys like him, mocking the help, going viral one slice at a time. "Come on, Marisol," Victor goaded, "give us that war face. Snarl a little." And that's when Marisol stopped. She turned her head just slightly and looked Victor straight in the eyes. Not long, not dramatic, but enough to shut him up for half a beat. Then she walked away. Victor laughed it off, but it was thinner now, performed. Jonas slid back into his seat, heart still taut. He hadn't intervened. Not yet. But now he knew something for certain. Marisol Rivera wasn't just surviving, she was waiting. And the next time Victor crossed the line, she wouldn't be walking away. The bell over the diner door chimed as the last customer shuffled out. It was close to 3 p.m., and the sun outside had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Inside, Rosie's was quiet. Too quiet. Marisol flipped the closed sign on the front door, then disappeared into the back, apron already off and folded tight in her hand. She moved past the mop closet, past the walk-in freezer, to the narrow stairwell that led up to the cramped staff storage room. Except it wasn't just storage. Not anymore. She keyed in a 4-digit code on a padlock, same pattern she used on a field radio during recon deployments, and pushed open the door. The space was tight, shelves of napkins, paper cups, syrup bottles, but against the far wall stood a metal filing cabinet. And just above it, tucked into the ceiling tiles, a custom-built surveillance rig. 3 microcams, hardwired to a drive no one knew existed. Marisol crouched down, connected her laptop, and began skimming. She fast-forwarded to 8:18 a.m. There he was, Victor Grange, mouth running, phone out, the usual vile stream of jokes. She didn't flinch watching it. Not anymore. This was surveillance, not memory. She'd learned to detach, but then, frame by frame, she caught it. Jonas MacBride. The way he sat rigid when Victor started taunting her. The subtle lean forward, the clenched jaw, the quiet decision not to act, but to be ready. She stared at his face on the screen, then closed the laptop. He was still outside. She knew he would be. Marisol headed down the stairs out the back door, where Jonas leaned against the brick wall, arms crossed. The sunlight painted deep lines across his face, lines that hadn't been there in the diner that morning. "You waited," she said. He didn't answer right away. just nodded toward the alley. Didn't want to leave before saying something? Then say it. Jonas hesitated. His voice, when it came, was low and calm. You're not just getting by, are you? Marisol narrowed her eyes. What do you think I'm doing? I think, he said, you're building something, collecting, preparing. He wasn't wrong. Marisol stepped closer, not aggressively, just enough to erase the space between caution and trust. Tell me, MacBride, she said, are you here to stop me? He shook his head. No, I'm here to help you burn the whole thing down. A beat passed between them, then another. Then, for the first time in days, Marisol allowed herself the faintest curve of a smile. The sand in Kandahar didn't fall, it scraped. It clung to your gear, your eyes, your lungs. It filled the cracks in your boots and the seams in your soul. The kind of dust that wasn't just earth, but history, burned and ground into powder. Marisol adjusted the strap on her medical pack and crouched behind a shattered mud brick wall, her eyes locked on the horizon. Gunfire echoed 2 blocks down, sharp and uneven. Not suppression fire, not organized. This was chaos. She keyed her comm. Bravo 2, status, static. Then pinned, North Alley, 2 down, 1 bleeding out. That was Holt, calm, clipped. But there was strain in his voice, the kind that told her they were minutes, maybe seconds from folding. Marisol took a breath and ran. She darted through the narrow alleyways of Maruf district, past burning carts and dead animals, past the half-melted faces of abandoned storefront mannequins. The Eve 09 times patch on her shoulder flapped with every step. Echo Viper 9 was deep black ops. No flag, no backup, no extraction plan. They were the backup. When they dropped in 2 weeks earlier, the objective had been clear: remove a HVT embedded with a rogue militia building biosignal jammers targeting drone control. But nothing had gone right. Intel was flawed. The target was gone. The town had been booby-trapped long before they arrived, and now they were cut off, down to 6 team members, bleeding supplies, and morale. She reached the North Alley just as a blast rocked the wall to her right, flinging shrapnel into the air. "Contact!" someone shouted. She dropped beside Holt, whose leg was shredded and slick with blood. "You're lucky," she muttered, already unzipping her kit. "Couple inches higher and I'd be wasting morphine." He gave her a grim smile through the pain. "Save it for someone who ain't already screwed." Behind her, Sergeant Avery, her younger brother, covered the rear with short, precise bursts from his suppressed M4. "They're flanking left. We gotta move!" "No," Marisol snapped, pulling a tourniquet tight. "You gotta hold." But something else was wrong. Her instincts, those razor-sharp sensors honed through too many dark corridors, prickled all at once. Silence. Not the absence of noise, but a shift. A pause in enemy fire they hadn't earned. She looked up just in time to see a drone, black, unfamiliar, rising silently above a rooftop 2 blocks east. "Eyes up," she barked. Too late. The blast that followed wasn't loud. It was low, vibrating, tearing through bone before the sound even registered. And then, fire! The explosion didn't just flatten walls, it hollowed the air. A pressure wave punched through the alley, flipping Holt's body like a rag doll and slamming Marisol against the stone with such force that her ribs cracked on impact. For a moment, there was no sound, just light, blinding, white-hot, hungry light. Then came the ringing, the kind that clawed into your skull and stayed there. Marisol couldn't move. Her legs were tangled in debris, her arms pinned beneath what felt like half a building. Heat pressed against her side, wet, searing, and only when she tasted metal in her mouth did she realize she was bleeding. Smoke curled through the alley like it was alive. The world smelled like burning plastic and scorched meat. Voices blurred in and out, shouts, coughs, static from a dying comms unit. She heard her name once, maybe twice. Then she heard Avery. "Wrapped her down, I can't see her!" He was alive, barely. She forced her head to the side, her vision doubling. Avery's silhouette was outlined in fire, gun still raised, crouched behind the broken frame of what used to be a bakery cart. "Don't you move!" he shouted, unloading a burst toward a shadow that darted through the smoke. But even as he fired, another drone hissed overhead. The second blast came lower, targeted. Marisol saw the flash before he did. "Avery, too late!" The fireball consumed everything, his body, the cart, the last thin thread of hope that Echo Viper 9 would leave this place intact. When she came to again, there was no movement, only rubble, fire, silence. Her gear was half melted into her body. Her arm, her right forearm, was burned raw, the skin peeled back in places. But the tattoo, EV09 times, still clung to her like a curse, and in that moment, something inside her snapped. They weren't coming. Command wouldn't send anyone, no airlift, no evac, no medics. Echo Viper was never meant to survive this. She understood now. This wasn't a rescue op gone wrong. It was a cleanup, a purge. She crawled for hours, maybe days, through basements, drainage tunnels, fields of red sand, until she reached a compound on the outskirts, a black site she'd memorized from a classified map months ago. It was abandoned, but it had water, shelter, a communications locker fried but half salvageable. That's where she stayed, until her body stopped shaking, until the scars sealed, until her mind stopped hoping, and then she disappeared. The world had written her off, and Marisol let them. By the time her body had stopped trembling and her wounds had closed into a patchwork of scar tissue, she knew there would be no coming back. As Sergeant Rivera, that name belonged to a woman who died in Kandahar. That name was burned into drone logs, black site reports, and deniable briefings no one would ever admit existed. So she became no one. The comms unit in the bunker was mostly destroyed, but she salvaged a single hard drive. It contained fragments, messages, encrypted orders, satellite overlays, and in the metadata she found what she needed. The man who had signed the mission's final reroute orders, Colonel Virgil Haynes, a paperman, never deployed, but his name was on the kill list. The list that sealed Echo Viper's fate under the code, full blackout protocol. She committed it all to memory. No files, no digital trail, only her. And the tattoo that refused to fade. When she emerged from the compound weeks later, she found a border town just west of Lashkar Gah. There, she bartered her dog tags for clothes, burned her last photo, took the name Ava Santos, then changed it again at the refugee checkpoint to Marisol Rivera, a name borrowed from a medic she'd once treated after a helicopter crash in Jalalabad. By the time she crossed into Turkey posing as a wounded aid worker, the mark of EV09 times was her only remaining truth. From there she drifted, Italy, then Mexico, then finally back to the US. The long way, through ports, through silence. She arrived with no passport, no past, and no plan except one: watch, wait, collect. For years, Marisol studied. She followed the breadcrumbs left by those who'd betrayed her team. The contractors who placed the drone orders, the officers who signed the evacuation denials, the corporate middlemen who profited from the signal-jamming tech Echo Viper had died trying to destroy. And slowly she began to trace them back to a name that kept reappearing: Victor Grange, now a consultant, public speaker, former defense liaison, no military history but plenty of war profits. He'd made his money off silence, and then, by some divine twist of irony, he ended up walking into the one diner where silence was armed. So she smiled behind every pour of coffee. She memorized his routine. She tracked every word, every insult, every tap of his phone camera, and she waited. Because Echo Viper 9 had been buried once. But it wasn't dead. It had simply learned how to stay very, very quiet. Until it was time to strike. The coffee shop was tucked behind an old bookstore on the edge of town, where the sidewalks cracked and the cell signal dropped to 1 bar on a good day. Jonas liked it because no one talked loud. and no one stared too long. Marisol liked it because there were 3 exits, and 2 of them didn't face the street. She was already there when he arrived. Back booth, hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee, her sleeves rolled down this time. The tattoo wasn't on display, not yet. She looked calm, almost too calm. Jonas knew that look. He'd worn it too many times before firefights. He slid into the booth across from her. Neither of them spoke for the first few seconds. Then he pulled out a small envelope and laid it on the table. She didn't touch it. "That from your war chest?" she asked. "No, from theirs." She raised an eyebrow. Jonas leaned in. "I've been building dossiers, quietly, on everyone who made Echo Viper disappear. Most of it's circumstantial, leaks, whispers, payments routed through shell companies. But there's a pattern." He tapped the envelope. "Grange is part of that pattern." Marisol's jaw clenched, but she nodded. "I figured too much access, too much arrogance." "More than that," Jonas continued. "He wasn't just an analyst. He worked for a joint advisory group contracted by both Rakotech and Zenthos Defense. Guess what both of those firms had in common?" Marisol stared. "They co-developed the biosignal jammers, the ones we were sent to stop." Her voice dropped. "So Victor wasn't just mocking the girl in the apron, he was mocking the team he helped bury." Jonas slid the envelope closer. "There's more. Names, dates. I've cross-checked everything I could, but it won't hold up in court. Not yet." She finally reached out and opened it. Inside were 3 photos, 2 clipped receipts, and a handwritten note with a string of codes. She studied them with a medic's eye. Fast, precise, absorbing the details behind the data. "Why give this to me?" she asked. "You could have run this solo." Jonas's voice was quiet. "Because you're the last piece that scares them." She didn't look up. He added, "I know a reporter, one of the few good ones left. You give her even half of what you've been collecting, she'll set the fire. We don't need justice yet, we need light." Marisol folded the envelope and slipped it into her jacket. Her eyes met his. "Then let's blind them." 2 days later, Delilah Knox walked into Rosie's diner wearing a faded Georgia Bulldogs hoodie and a tired expression that didn't match the sharpness in her eyes. She didn't take notes. She didn't bring a camera. She just ordered black coffee and slipped a folded envelope beneath the sugar dispenser. Marisol picked it up like it was nothing, just another order slip, and walked it back to the kitchen. Inside was a burner phone, already powered, already connected. The file directory was empty, waiting. That night, Marisol uploaded everything. Audio clips, Victor laughing about government ghosts, screen recordings of him showing off payments from consulting contracts on encrypted apps, photographs from her surveillance cams, a time-stamped video of Victor drunkenly bragging to a date about cleaning up loose ends in the desert. Delilah's only reply came 10 minutes later. "Holy hell, this will burn." The trap was ready. Now they needed one last piece, the match. It came right on cue 3 days later. Victor returned to the diner with his usual swagger. New watch, loud voice. He was already recording before he even sat down. Jonas was there too, seated calmly near the front with a newspaper he wasn't reading. Victor smirked when he saw Marisol. "Look who's still serving hash browns, like she never crawled out of a crater. She didn't blink." "Oh, come on," he pushed, lifting his phone. "Give me that look again. That whole trauma victim turned martyr thing. Real crowd pleaser." Jonas stood. Victor noticed. "Hey, old-timer, mind your business." Jonas smiled, slow and tired. "I would, but I'm allergic to cowards who brag about war zones they've never bled in." The diner went still. Victor turned red. "You don't know who I am." "I know exactly who you are," Jonas replied, "and more importantly, so does she." Victor turned toward Marisol, sneering. "You gonna cry now?" She stepped forward, calm, collected. "No," she said. "I'm going to let you finish your coffee. Then I'm going to walk back into the office and press send." Victor blinked. "Send what?" Marisol's voice lowered just enough to be dangerous. Everything. He stared. She leaned closer. "You talk a lot, Victor. I just made sure someone was listening." He stood up suddenly, knocking his chair back. But Jonas was already between him and the exit. The whole diner watched, not with curiosity, with recognition, because something had shifted. The waitress wasn't invisible anymore. She was a soldier. And the man who mocked her? He was already burning. The first video dropped just before sunrise. A clipped audio track, Victor Granger's voice, unmistakably smug, bragging about ghost units and how some missions were meant to go sideways. It played over a still image of him smirking at a bar, time-stamped and verified. An hour later, a second video surfaced. This time, grainy footage from Rosie's surveillance system, showing Victor laughing as he filmed Marisol. Overlaid was a subtitle, "They buried her unit." Now he jokes about it. By noon, the hashtag was trending. Hashtag Ecovapor was real. Hashtag she survived. Hashtag silence no more. Then came the firestorm. Military forums lit up. Veterans started posting patches, scars, even old mission briefings with redacted chunks, but the same call sign, EV09 times. It was like a dormant nerve had been struck, and everyone still walking with ghost wounds stood up at once. By sunset, Grange and Holt Consulting had locked their social media accounts. By midnight, 3 defense contractors quietly scrubbed any mention of their contracts with the company from their websites. And at dawn the next day, Delilah Knox's full expose hit the front page of 3 independent military publications. The headline was simple: "The waitress with the war tattoo, a survivor the government erased." Jonas found Marisol on the rooftop of the motel that night, sitting cross-legged beside the satellite dish, a burner phone next to her, screen still glowing. She didn't say anything as he sat beside her. Below, the quiet town didn't yet know what kind of story had been born in its shadows. "You started a war," he said gently. Marisol shrugged. "They fired first." He nodded. "You're not done, though." She glanced at him. "You think I should go bigger?" "I think," Jonas said, "it's time you stopped hiding behind coffee cups and let the world see what Echo Viper trained you to be." Marisol looked out toward the horizon. The scars on her arm caught the moonlight, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt seen. Victor Grange wasn't the kind of man to go down quietly. Less than 48 hours after the first wave of exposes hit, he resurfaced, not in hiding but on national television. Morning talk shows, podcasts, carefully lit Zoom interviews with a curated bookshelf behind him, and a pre-written script he delivered like a martyr. "They're coming after my name," he said, voice low and wounded. Over a misunderstanding, a joke taken out of context, he claimed Marisol was a plant, that the footage was doctored, that the so-called military unit never existed. He accused the veteran community of launching a smear campaign to destroy good men doing real work for national defense. It might have worked. It had before, until a man named Staff Sergeant Lucas Tremaine stepped in front of a camera, grey beard, desert tan, worn flak jacket with a patch that read simply Eve 09 times. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He simply looked into the lens and said, "I was there when the drone hit. I held what was left of my squad leader in my hands. And the woman you're trying to erase? She pulled me out of the fire when the government left us to burn. Within hours, more came. One by one, faces appeared, some blurred for safety, some in full view, each with scars, ink, metal in their bones, all of them repeating one phrase: Echo Viper was real, and so is she." Marisol didn't ask them to come forward. She hadn't even known some of them had survived, but the truth had its own gravity, and once Jonas helped it break the surface, it couldn't be buried again. By day 3, Victor's legal team released a statement threatening litigation against false veterans and digital impersonators. By day 4, that statement was quietly deleted. And on the morning of the 5th day, Victor Grange walked into Rosie's diner again. No camera, no entourage, just anger and desperation. The bell above the door jingled, but this time it didn't carry its usual warmth. Victor stepped inside Rosie's like he owned the oxygen in the room. His face was tight, his eyes sunken from nights of bad sleep and worse damage control. There was no phone in his hand now, no smug smile, just the bare expression of a man who'd realized control was slipping, and he didn't know how to take it back. Marisol was behind the counter. She looked up once, then went back to pouring coffee. Victor marched forward, hands stiff at his sides. "You think this is over?" he growled. A few heads turned. Jonas was already seated in the corner booth, coffee half finished. He didn't move, just watched. Victor leaned in across the counter. "You humiliated me." Marisol didn't blink. "You did that yourself. You lied," he hissed. "You're not even in the system. I checked. No Rivera on any Echo roster. You fabricated this entire—" A voice cut in from behind him. "You looking for this?" asked a man near the front window. Victor turned. The man stood slowly, pulling aside his worn jacket to reveal a faded patch, a red viper around a combat blade. "EV09 times. Name's Mason Carlyle," he said. "You told people I was fake. Now I'm here to say you're full of shit." Another voice rose from a table of 3. Lieutenant Ana Rios served 2 tours, Echo Viper out of Kandahar. One by one, people stood, not shouting, not angry, just present, like old ghosts stepping back into the light. Victor took a step back. "You think this proves something?" he barked. "Bunch of has-beens in a diner?" Jonas finally stood. He didn't raise his voice, he just said no. "What proves something is that you came here thinking this was still your stage, and now you're standing in a room full of people who stopped playing your game." Victor looked around. He saw eyes, cameras, witnesses, the same tool he'd used to mock and exploit, now pointed at him. He opened his mouth, but said nothing. Marisol didn't move from behind the counter. She just refilled a cup, calm as ever, and softly said, "Now go finish being irrelevant somewhere else." Victor stared at her for a long second, then turned and walked out. No applause followed, only silence. And then the slow, firm nod of a man near the door who whispered, "Took long enough." The video from Rosie's diner went viral before Victor even made it back to his car. A customer near the window had caught everything. The confrontation, the quiet defiance, the moment Marisol calmly told him to finish being irrelevant. No theatrics, no shouting, just silence speaking louder than any microphone ever could. By that evening, the footage had over 4 million views. News outlets jumped on it. Veteran Waitress silences defense consultant in viral showdown. The real Echo Viper survivors stepped forward after government denial. Grange and Holt Consulting was hit with 5 contract withdrawals in 24 hours. On the 3rd day, they issued a vague press release citing irreparable reputational harm. Then they quietly dissolved the board. Victor disappeared from the media cycle. No more interviews, no tweets, just silence. The same kind of silence he once used to erase others. Now it erased him. And in that vacuum, another voice began to rise. Marisol was invited to speak at the Veterans Advocacy Summit in Charleston, originally as a guest, then as a keynote when the board read her story. She almost didn't go until Jonas knocked on her door the morning of the event, holding a pressed suit jacket and a badge with her name printed clean across the front. "Marisol Rivera, Echo Viper 9, you earned this," he said. "Even if they forgot, you didn't." The auditorium was packed. Uniforms of every shade, medals polished, eyes sharp. Marisol stood behind the podium, small by comparison, scars visible, hair pulled back tight. She didn't read from a script, she just told the truth. "I didn't come here to speak for Echo Viper," she said. "I came here because for too long people like us were told our silence kept the country safe. But silence didn't keep us alive. We did that. The room didn't erupt. It just stood." Thousands of men and women rose from their seats in a wave of quiet respect. Jonas, standing in the back, watched her with the same awe he'd once reserved for battlefield miracles. And as she stepped down from the stage, badge still clipped to her collar, someone asked her, "What happens next?" She looked them in the eye and answered without hesitation, "We find the ones still hidden, and we bring them home." 6 months later, the storm had passed, but the ripples were still spreading. Rosie's diner had a new sign taped in the window: "Closed Sundays, out fighting ghosts." No one asked what it meant. Everyone understood. Marisol no longer wore the apron. She still came in some mornings, helped Miguel prep the kitchen, made the coffee stronger than it needed to be, but her life had moved beyond laminated menus and chipped booths. After Charleston, she received dozens of invitations, speaking engagements, panel discussions, government inquiries asking if she'd consult for new veteran outreach programs. Most she declined, but one letter, hand-delivered, no return address, caught her attention. It was from Fort Reading Command Base, signed by a general whose name she recognized from the shadows of past reports. Inside was a single sentence: "Echo Viper deserves its name back." 2 weeks later, Marisol stood beside Jonas on a cold runway at Fort Reading. They were older now, stiffer. But when the new brass showed them the facility, the one being quietly restructured into a veterans recon intelligence hub, they both knew what it truly was. It was a resurrection. The base was unofficially renamed Project Viper. Jonas oversaw security protocols. Marisol handled the intel screening unit, quietly flagging names of operatives who had gone silent or been erased by the system. They didn't make noise about it. They just worked. One day, Delilah Knox visited. She brought with her a wall, not a digital one, not for clicks or likes, but an actual bronze honor wall, etched with the names of the Echo Viper team, every last one. Some had no grave, some had been listed as training casualties. But now, they had metal, and above their names, one line, "In memory of those erased to protect the mission, and those who returned to finish IT." Marisol stood there, fingers tracing the letters of Avery's name. For the first time she cried, not because he was gone, but because, finally, he was seen. By spring, Project Viper was more than a name. It was a movement. Word had spread quietly, discreetly, through forums, encrypted group chats, and whispered conversations between veterans who hadn't worn a uniform in years but still carried the war under their skin. They started showing up, some limping, some with records scrubbed so clean they technically never served, some too broken to speak but carrying faded photos, dog tags, or fragments of unit patches no one else remembered. Marisol met with every one of them. She never asked them to prove anything. She only asked, "What did they take from you?" And then, "Do you want it back?" Jonas curated the files, cross-referenced aliases with blacked-out ops. Delilah kept publishing, carefully, one name at a time, one redemption at a time. No hype, no headlines, just restoration. One day, a young recruit came to the front gate at Fort Reading with a file he wasn't supposed to have. His name was Noah Reyes, barely 24, still in reserve training. Said he'd seen a tattoo once, EV09 times, on a woman who pulled him out of an ambush overseas. No record of her name, no confirmation she was even deployed. He held up a drawing. It was crude, pencil on paper, but it was accurate. Jonas passed it to Marisol without a word. She looked at it, silent for a long time, then smiled. "She's still out there," she said. Noah blinked. "You know her?" "I trained her," Marisol replied, gently folding the sketch. "You just confirmed she's alive." That night she stood on the roof of the base again, same sky, same stars, but the world below had changed. Where once there had been silence, now there were signals. Where once she'd hidden her scars, Now others carried theirs with pride. Jonas joined her with 2 mugs of black coffee. "We might be onto something here," he said. Marisol nodded. "We're building what they tried to erase." He raised his cup in quiet salute to the ones who wouldn't stay buried. She clinked hers against his and whispered back, "To the ones who came looking." The sun was low over Fort Reading, casting long golden stripes across the compound's quiet courtyard. It was just past 1,700 hours. Most of the base had gone still for the evening shift change, and the wind carried only the distant rhythm of flag ropes clinking against metal poles. Near the west wing, just beside the chapel where old gravel met new concrete, stood the bronze honor wall. It was quiet there, always. A single man approached it. He moved slowly, his steps uneven. The years had worn deep into his bones, one hand shaking slightly, the other gripping a cane carved with the initials of a friend long gone. His jacket was plain, no medals, just a single patch faded beyond recognition. But his eyes, they were sharp, deliberate. He scanned the wall, whispering names under his breath, names no one had spoken aloud in decades, until he stopped. His fingers reached forward, tentative, almost afraid, and gently touched one etched line. Rivera, Marisol, Ave 0 9 times. The old soldier didn't speak. He didn't need to. His hand trembled as it rested on the name, not from age, from memory, from something left unfinished that had finally found a place to land. Behind him no one stood, no audience, no cameras, only the sound of the wind rustling through the flags and the faint hum of an old military hymn playing from the chapel's speakers. And in that stillness, the past folded quietly into the present, not erased, not rewritten, but remembered. At the far end of the courtyard, Marisol watched from a distance, standing beside Jonas. She said nothing. She simply nodded once and turned away. Some stories didn't need retelling, they just needed to be seen, and now they were, and maybe that's all she ever wanted. Not applause, not medals, just a name, carved in metal, seen by someone who remembers. Because when the world forgets its warriors, they don't disappear. They wait until someone like her brings them back into the light. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone who served, someone who vanished in silence but deserved to be remembered, we invite you to say their name in the comments below. Let their memory rise with hers. This is Veteran Biker, where silence is not surrender, and stories like Marisol's are honored, not erased. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if you believe these stories deserve to be told. We'd love to hear what you felt in that final scene. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And now we invite you to keep walking with us. Choose one of the stories on your screen and ride with the next warrior who refused to vanish, because the mission never ends.